After his wife passed away, a stepfather did the unthinkable with the one person he had left in the world. She was only 24 at the time, and what happened between them will make you question where grief ends and forbidden love begins. Can such a love ever be forgiven? Welcome to the story of a stepfather and his stepdaughter. Subscribe to Daily Unexpected Stories for more like this. It begins in a quiet, weathered cabin nestled deep within the pine forests on the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina. Once, it had been a place filled with warmth, apple pies baking every Saturday, soft laughter from the kitchen, and golden sunlight streaming through the lace curtains as Mary, John's wife, hummed and sang over bubbling pots. But that joy faded into dust after Mary passed from cancer that cruel autumn. She left behind not only silence, but two people broken in different ways. John, then 55, wasn't a man of many words. He didn't weep in public. But when Mary died, a part of him died too. He didn't shed tears, he just lived. Lived with memories. And then there was Ellie, Mary's daughter from a previous marriage. Though not related to John by blood, she had called him Uncle John for years with the respectful distance of a well-raised art student. They'd shared a home, but never a bond, until tragedy pressed them together. After the funeral, Ellie was supposed to return to her life in the city. Instead, she arrived at the old house with 2 bags of clothes, eyes still swollen with grief. "I'll only stay a while," she said softly. John nodded. No questions, no demands. Some grief only needs silence to be understood. Winter came early. That year, Asheville's skies turned gray and cold winds crawled in from the mountains. Inside the cabin, the fireplace burned day and night, but it could not melt the frost in their hearts. John kept his routines, woke up early, made coffee, set the table with 2 plates, out of habit. But across from him, Mary's chair stayed. Empty, no laughter, no teasing about his overcooked eggs. Ellie lived in the house but barely existed within it. She rarely emerged in daylight. Her room became a dark cave, the curtains always drawn. The Ellie he remembered, the passionate, laughing, paint-splattered girl, was gone. He tried gently, placed her favorite snacks at the door, left books on her nightstand. Once, he brought her a steaming plate of noodles late at night. She took it without meeting his eyes. The next morning, the plate was in the sink, washed, dried, neatly placed. It was the only sign she still remembered how to care. But that comfort didn't last. Soon, Ellie began slipping out at night, quietly, always. After midnight. No notes, no words. Just the soft click of the door, then the fading sound of heels on wooden planks. John didn't know where she went, but her return always told a story. The smell of cheap perfume, cigarette smoke, the sharp sting of alcohol in the air around her, her coat damp from the night, her silence louder than screams. She was searching for something. Not love, not fun, oblivion. One sleepless night, John sat in the dark living room. Only the flickering fire lit his face. The clock read 1:42 a.m. The wind moaned outside. And then footsteps. The door creaked open. Ellie stepped in, mascara smeared, cheeks glistening, eyes red. She walked past him without a word, but paused, just a second, then vanished into her room. That moment broke something in John. He didn't blame her. Grief can rot a soul from the inside. But he was watching her slip away like sand between fingers. And he didn't know how to stop it. That same week, it rained for days. Cold, slow, relentless. He was making dinner when the phone rang. An unfamiliar sound after weeks of silence. A man's voice, nervous, uncertain. "Are you a relative of Ellie's?" "I'm the bartender at Claymore. She's here. Been sitting alone for 3 hours. Very drunk. She keeps calling for her mom." "I thought you should know." John's heart dropped. He didn't grab a coat, didn't change shoes. Just keys. Rain pelted him as he raced to the car, mind blank, hands trembling. Claymore was on the edge of town. A dive bar soaked in neon and bad memories. He walked through the fog and rain, heart pounding. Inside dim lights, cigarette smoke. The twang of an old jukebox. And there she was, Ellie, slumped at the bar like a forgotten doll, hair tangled, makeup streaked. 3 empty glasses beside her. She didn't see him at first. Then, "I knew you'd come," she whispered. There was no anger in her voice. No shame. Just a raw, bottomless sadness. He took her home in silence. She rested her head against the cold window, one hand clutching the hem of his coat like a child. The car's door didn't shut properly, cold wind poured in. But he didn't dare fix it. Didn't want to break whatever fragile thread connected them in that moment. At home, she stumbled into the house. Her dress soaked, her skin cold. He wrapped her in a blanket, hands steady but unsure. "I brought you clothes," he said, offering dry pajamas and a towel. She didn't respond. Just a small shake of the head, not a refusal. A surrender. "You can't do it yourself?" he asked quietly. Still nothing. And then John understood she could. She just didn't want to try anymore. So he did it. Turned away as best he could. His hands shaking slightly as he helped her out of the soaked dress. He was careful. So careful. Like she might shatter. Every time the damp fabric brushed her skin. She flinched, not from fear, but from feeling. Neither of them crossed a line that night. But something shifted. The silence between them cracked. Something buried beneath grief. Stirred, confused and fragile. He pulled the blanket over her and turned to leave the room. But before his fingers touched the doorknob, she spoke. Her voice was faint, barely above a breath. "Don't leave me alone." He turned back and sat down on the chair. They said nothing. There was only the pale yellow nightlight, the soft tapping of the rain on the eaves, and a strange feeling, both warm and cold, spreading in both of their chests that night. The house seemed to stop breathing. Ellie had fallen asleep in John's loose sweater, her pajama pants still a little long at her ankles. Her hair was still damp, clinging to her cheeks and forehead like streaks of rain that hadn't had time to dry. Her face, without her makeup, looked younger, more fragile, and somehow strangely. Peter Fulgen sat in the chair by the bed, unable to sleep. The yellow light of the nightlight illuminated half his face, revealing his dark eyes and his forehead lined with wrinkles that had deepened over the years. He didn't know how long he'd been sitting there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe more than an hour. The clock had lost all meaning as time in the room slowed with each steady breath of Ellie. He should leave, he knew, but every time his hand moved away from hers, Ellie's lips moved as if to say something in her sleep. "Don't leave me alone." The words still rang in his ears, not because they were so special, but because it was the first time in months that she had opened her heart, even if it was just a small request. John stood up, about to leave, but as soon as he pulled his hand away from hers, Ellie turned around, burrowing deeper into the blanket, as if she had lost her place to lean on. He hesitated, then instead of leaving, he gently pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down again in that small space. The air grew warmer, not from the fireplace, but from something else. A simmering emotion not yet named. He looked at Ellie for a long time, not like a stepfather looking at his stepdaughter, but like someone looking at an unfinished painting. Ellie was not perfect. She was stubborn, capricious, and sometimes even strange, but in this moment, she was the only person who made him feel necessary. The room was so quiet that John could hear the ticking of the clock on the living room wall. Each tick was a question echoing in his mind. What am I doing? Am I overstepping my bounds? Am I just trying to hold on to something so I didn't feel so alone at that moment? Ellie stirred slightly. Her hand reached out, unconsciously touched his fingers, and held, not too tightly, but enough to freeze him. She didn't open her eyes, didn't call his name. But the touch, warm, gentle, wasn't like that between two close friends. It was an invitation, but it was also a reminder. Jen didn't pull away. He could not, because he didn't recognize the danger in this feeling, but because he understood Ellie needed to feel held, not by reason, but by heart, and maybe he did chew outside the rain. continued to fall steadily on the roof. The sound was no longer as fierce as before, but had changed to a slow, steady rhythm like Osset lullaby for those who stay up late because of things they dare not say out loud. John was still sitting on the edge of the bed, his hand still in Ellie's. He could feel the warmth from her palm, not warmth of a body, but a fragile feeling like spider silk, ready to break if called by the right name. Ellie turned over, opening her eyes slightly. The soft light of the nightlight reflected in her pupils, shimmering like lake water after rain. She was not surprised to see John still sitting there. She did not ask why. She just said softly, "You haven't left yet." John was silent. He nodded slightly. "I need to sleep safe." Ellie smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "It's been a long time since I felt safe." She turned her head on the pillow slowly, but her hand still held his a little tighter. This time she looked at him so long Faith had to turn away, not out of embarrassment, but out of fear that there was something in her eyes like Mary's. "In this, my mother," Ellie said, her voice almost a whisper. "There are times when I wish I'd died before her." John turned back, his eyes full of shock and pain. "Don't ever say that again, because if she were alive, I wouldn't be who I am, and you wouldn't be sitting here, looking at me." Like she paused. "Like what?" John asked, almost unconsciously. "Like you are only one who makes me feel alive." The air froze with words so gentle, but so cruel, stung deep into his chest. There was nothing wrong with the way she said them, but everything about them was wrong, and he knew he couldn't argue because it was true. Ellie sat up. The blanket had fallen away, revealing the shoulders of her sweeter. Her hair was falling over her forehead. Her eyes were no longer those of a child. They were those of a woman facing the only person she trusted in the world. "I'm sorry," she whispered. John tried to say something, but he didn't have time. She had wrapped her arms around him, her knees to his chest. Her breathing was soft, but her heartbeat was rapid. He could feel every movement of the small hand that was squeezing the back of his shirt. The hug wasn't inviting, it wasn't flirtatious, but it was urgent, as if he let go, she would disappear. John wrapped his arms around her. It was the first time in years that he had hugged someone for so long, not out of desire, but because he was afraid that if he didn't hug back, he would never hear anyone call his name with those trusting eyes again. "Don't get me wrong," he whispered. "You don't," Ellie replied. "I just need you here, that's all." They sat there in silence, and then when John tried to get up to leave, Ellie held him back, said nothing more. She just rested her head on his shoulder. They sat leaning against each other, their bodies motionless, but their minds seemingly far away. And in that cold, rainy night, they both knew they were no longer where they used to be. The morning after the rain, the house was covered in white mist. The pine branches on the porch dripped water, leaving sparkling streaks on the glass like traces of a dream that had not yet faded. John woke up early, as usual, made a coffee, and left a second cup by the fireplace where Ellie had often curled up reading as a child. He did not see her immediately, but when he turned to wash the cup, he noticed that the sweater she had worn the night before was neatly folded on the back of the chair, and the coffee cup was half empty. Ellie had woken up earlier than he had expected, and perhaps she had begun to want to live again, if only a little, since that night. Something had changed between them. Not loudly, not openly, but every gesture, look, and silence had become different. When John called Ellie down for breakfast, she not only said yes, but also added, "Thank you." As she poured him water, she touched his hand briefly, short enough, and no one thought anything of it, but long enough for his heart to skip a beat. On Sunday afternoon, John was cleaning Mary's old studio, a room that had long been closed off. He didn't think Ellie would care, but when he opened the door, she came in. "What are you doing?" "I think it's time to let this space breathe." Ellie stood in the doorway, silent for a long time. Then she stepped in, gently touching the easel, the old brushes still stained with dried paint. "Can I use this room again?" John nodded. "This used to be my mother's. Now, if you help me paint it again, I think she'd agree." From that day in, Ellie began to paint again. The brushstrokes were shaky at first, overlapping and tired, but gradually the colors began to make sense. The room became more and more light, and the sounds, the scrubbing, the soft footsteps, made the house not a place of sadness, but a place where something was being reborn every day. John made 2 cups of tea in the afternoon, placing one beside Ellie. She always looked up and smiled a fleeting smile, but one that warmed his heart. One day she made him the first ani, and for the first time in months they sat across from each other, sipping in silence. "I feel peaceful," Ellie said softly. "It's strange when people have been hurt for so long they're afraid of peace. Peace is not the absence of wounds." John replied, "It's the acceptance of letting them stay inside you." They looked at each other, then quickly looked away, but in that moment, they both knew the concern between them was no longer simply kinship, had turned into something gentle, cautious, and dangerous. The winter evenings that followed were no longer completely silent. Ellie began to cook more often. She tried something simple sometimes, just hot soup or a cold-cut sandwich, but for John that was something that had never happened since Mary died one time while he was washing the dishes. Ellie stood beside him, rolling up her sleeves to help him wipe them. Her hand brushed his lightly. Not intentionally, no pulling away, just touching. But John stood still for a few seconds after that one night. They watched an old movie together on the sofa in the living room. They both watched in silence, but when a sad scene came on, Ellie tilted her head, leaning against John's shoulder, not speaking, no asking permission. She just leaned in as lightly as a breeze, but enough to send warmth through every fiber of his being. John didn't dare turn to look. He didn't know what he should do. Part of him wanted to push it away, to remind them both that this wasn't the right thing to do, but another part, deeper, weaker, just wanted this moment to last forever. "Did you ever think you'd ever love anyone after my mother?" Ellie asked, her voice flat. The question made John choke. He took a breath. "I don't think so, because I don't feel like I can fully trust anyone anymore." "What if it was Simeon you trusted all along?" "Ellie, I didn't say I was," she interrupted, smiling sadly. "I was just making a hypothesis." John turned to look at her. She was still leaning her head against his shoulder. Her eyes didn't leave the screen, but her hand was close to his, very close. "Just a crack apart. Theories can be as scary as truth," he whispered. The silence that followed was much longer. When the movie ended, Ellie stood up to clear the popcorn tray. John remained there, not getting up immediately. He watched her figure walk into the kitchen, a slender figure, her hair tied in a hurry, and he realized it had been a long time since he had looked at someone with the eyes of a man, not a father, not a guardian, but Simeon, who was moved that evening. When John entered his room, he saw a new drawing on his desk. It was him sitting, reading by the fireplace, the light illuminating half of his face, a soft warm line, a pair of quiet eyes. In the corner of the painting was a neat line, "You are the only safe place I have ever known." John sat down on the bed, and he knew it was no longer just affection between them, was a growing feeling, like a seed that had been planted in the wrong soil, but still took root, grew, defying rules, defying morality. It didn't rain that night. There was no thunder or lightning, just a quiet winter night where the wind in the woods breathed softly through the leaves, as if deliberately not to disturb anything. But in that silence, something irreversible began to take shape. John didn't know why he was standing in front of the studio. The room now bore not only traces of Mary, but also traces of Ellie, new paintings, fresh paint, wet palette, and in the middle, Ellie sitting on the floor, hair down, legs crossed, holding a steaming cup of tea. She looked up when she saw him, smiling, an unadorned, unguarded smile, as if she had been waiting for him. "I've made some peppermint tea. Would you like some?" Joan entered, the door behind him closed softly. They sat across from each other, separated only by a small wooden table on which were 2 cups of hot tea. They said nothing at first. They just looked at each other, sipping their tea and letting the room be filled with the soft scent of mint, the yellow light from the table lamp, and unnamed feelings. "I drew you," Ellie said gently, pushing a sketch to the center of the table. It was him sitting back against the sofa, staring into the distance, holding a book. "I've never felt this soft, because I'm only like this when I'm with you," she said without hesitation. There was a long pause. Then Ellie stood up, walked over to him, and put her cup of tea down on the side table. "Ken, is it next to you?" John nodded. She sat down close to him. The scent of her hair seeped into his shirt. Her hand rested on his, not furtively, not accidentally this time, but consciously, by choice. "I don't want this night to be like every other night," she whispered. Ellie John shuddered. "We can't do this." "Why?" "Because you're my stepfather. No, you were there for me when my mother died, the only one who didn't leave, the one who made me feel worthy of love. But this love isn't right." Ellie put her hand on his cheek, forcing him to look her in the eye. "Right or wrong, maybe doesn't matter when you've been alone for so long." The next moment, very soft but clear, her lips touched his as light as a dragonfly landing on water. John didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. The touch only lasted a few seconds, but when they separated, they both knew something was broken. John stood up, stepped back. His face was pale. "I'm sorry, this shouldn't have happened." Ellie still sat there, her eyes not blooming, just sad. "So if I regret it tomorrow morning, will you forget about tonight?" John swallowed. "No, I will never forget, but I will live like it never happened. If it will make you feel better." "What if it is the only thing that makes you feel alive?" John closed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists. No one spoke. The room felt stifling, not from lack of air, but from an abundance of the unnameable. The paintings on the walls seemed to stare down at them silently, as if witnessing something both sacred and dangerous. John turned, took a few steps, and stopped in front of the easel. He looked at the unfinished portrait of Mary. Her eyes were still the same, gentle but stern, and in that moment, he felt like a traitor, not just to the memory of his dead wife, but to the man he had believed himself to be. "I thought I was a good man," John said, his voice low and husky. "All my life I tried to be decent, to do nothing out offline, but tonight I'm not sure who I am anymore. I don't need a good man." Ellie said, standing up. "I need a real man." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him from behind gently, but it was enough to make him almost weak. Her breath touched his neck. Her hand rested on his chest where his heart was pounding. "I know this is wrong," she said, "but if just tonight, just this once, we could be people who weren't bound by the past, by predetermined roles, would it be a sin?" Zhang turned. They looked at each other. There was no distance, no excuses, just two people, lonely, broken, and finding each other in the broken pieces of their lives. This time, when their lips met, there was no trembling. It was real, fierce, passionate, and desperate. Her arms went around his neck, his arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her close to his chest. They kissed, long, deep, breathless, as if the world around them had disappeared. When they both pulled it away, their breaths were ragged, their faces flushed, their eyes unable to tear themselves away. "Go to my room," Ellie said. John said nothing, just nodded, and they walked out of the studio, up the stairs, each step as if they were climbing a fatal slope, knowing they would fall, but not stopping. That night they were together. There was no music, no candlelight, no sweet whispers, just skin and skin, breathing together, and a mixture of desire and pain, like two people adrift at sea, finding each other as they were about to drown. When they were done, Ellie lay on her side, her hand on John's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and John couldn't close his eyes. He stared at the ceiling, his head empty, his heart itching as if it were being squeezed. Part of him wanted to turn back time, part of him just wanted to stay in this wrong moment forever. "Are you okay?" John asked. Ellie nodded. "I don't regret it, but I'm scared of what's scared that tomorrow morning you'll look at me differently." John touched her cheek gently. "I'm just afraid you'll hate yourself." They were both silent outside. The forest wind blew, and in that wind there was something like a cry, someone's or their own consciences, writhing and screaming. For 3 days after that fateful night, neither of them mentioned what had happened, not because they had forgotten, but because they both knew if they had named it, everything would come crashing down. John tried to keep things normal. Cooked, he tended the garden. He occasionally visited the butcher in town. Ellie spent most of her time in her studio, burying herself in her paintings and mint tea, but when their eyes met, there was an undercurrent, a closeness that couldn't be hidden, but couldn't be made public. Then on Saturday morning, Martha arrived. She was Mary's cousin. She had lived in the house for a few months when Ellie was a baby. Martha was a woman so direct, so sharp, so observant, that it was hard to escape her scrutiny. Heard Ellie was back and her mother had just died, so I thought I'd stop by for a few days, Martha said, standing on the porch, suitcase in hand, her eyes fixed on John, as if she were trying to read his mind. Come in. It's been a long time." "Yes, 10 years, but there are things that can't be forgotten even after 10 years. Her words were like a light needle piercing the already tense atmosphere between the two people in the house. Ellie was surprised to see Martha but tried to keep her composure. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. And you look pale." "I'm fine. It looks like you're being taken care of." Very well. The words weren't spoken loudly, but they fell on John like an alarm bell. Martha didn't need to shout, just had to sow a doubt to make others waver. Woe. For the next few days, Martha stayed at home. She observed everything carefully. The way John and Ellie avoided eye contact when she was around, the way Ellie walked out of the studio at night, then hurried back when she saw the light in Martha's room was still on. The way the only painting Ellie wouldn't let anyone see was a portrait of John. One morning, Martha made tea and sat across from Ellie on the porch. The wind was gentle, the sky clear, but fear between them was heavy as stone. "You paint beautifully deep, thank you. But you can only paint like that when you feel it." Ellie didn't answer, she just looked away. "You know," Martha said slowly, "I saw Mary cry when she found out John was so close to you. You were little, so you didn't understand, but I did." "Mary was afraid of it." Ellie turned, her eyes changed, not panic but defense. "There's nothing wrong between you and him. I'm not saying it's wrong. Just saying, do you think anyone else would understand?" John knew he had to do something, but any explanation now was a fallacy. Martha had seen enough to not need proof, and the scariest thing was she could tell at any time to her family, to the neighbors, to have police that night. Martha called John out onto the porch. They sat under the yellow light, neither of them speaking for a long time. "What are you thinking?" John asked. "I'm thinking, why would something like you let that happen? You don't understand." "I do very well, because you've been faced with a forbidden emotion that I couldn't control, but I stopped. We didn't mean to hurt anyone. You did, not just Ellie, but Mary's memory. The morality you lived by. I love her." Martha was silent for a long time. Then she stood up. "Then you have to end it yourself before it ends." John couldn't sleep that night. He looked over to Ellie's room. The light still shone through the crack in the door. He knew that if he opened the door and walked in, she wouldn't ask any questions. She would just open the covers and let them lie down next to her like the nights before. But he couldn't, because this Timite wasn't just them. There was someone else's gaze, someone who wouldn't forgive a. Martha left the house on a cold gray morning, not raining. She left no further threats, no goodbye hugs, no glances back at Ellie, just a note on the kitchen table with 3 words written in a firm handwriting. "Let's finish." John folded the note and put it in his pocket. But it was like a stone in his chest, heavy and cold, and he knew he couldn't pretend it wasn't there. Ellie saw her go from the drawing room window, but she didn't move from the easel. She didn't ask John anything. She was quieter, painted more, and in the nights that followed, Sherkin to her habit of quietly entering his room in the middle of the night for the first time since the incident. John gently pushed her hand away. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, his eyes avoiding her thin shoulders in her thin nightgown. "I need you." Ellie whispered, her eyes still fixed on him, as if she would vanish if she looked away. "I need a life that isn't ruined by mistakes like this," John replied, his voice shaking both as a warning to her and as if he were talking to himself. Ellie didn't cry. She just looked at him for a long time, then quietly turned away. But the next night she came again, and this time John didn't push her away. They were no longer two people walking blindly in the dark. They knew what they were doing was wrong. They understood the fragility of forgiveness, that if one more person knew, everything would collapse. But because they knew so wealthy, clung to each other like two people who knew they were falling but couldn't stop themselves from falling. One evening, as the fog began to settle over the pine forest, John and Ellie sat on the porch, each holding a cup of hot tea. The yellow light from the living room shone behind them, enough to see each other, but also enough to hide the emotions that were hard to name. "I got a job offer in the city," Ellie said, her voice trying to keep from shaking with her heartbeat. John was silent for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "Congratulations," he said, his voice low and broken. "A small art studio, not big. They like the style you're repurposing," Ellie added, looking away into the woods, not daring to meet his eyes. "It might be a good start," John said, trying to smile, but his heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. "I think I should go," Ellie said slowly as if convincing herself, not because I'm running away, because if I stay I can't stop. John nodded. He understood. He'd understood it since that first night, but he'd never had the courage to say it. I know, admitted his voice full of regret. I don't regret it, Ellie said, turning to look at him, her eyes red. But I don't want either of us to live with the guilt. How long will you be gone? John asked, though he knew the answer would break his heart even more. Maybe a few months. Ellie replied, still looking into the woods. Maybe longer. Can you come visit John? Asked almost a silent plea. Ellie turned back, looking him straight in the eyes. Only if you forget wo. I am, she whispered so softly she was afraid she might hear it. They whirsled for a long time. The tea cooled in her hands. The night air grew colder, but neither of them wanted to leave that chair, as if while they were still together, they hadn't really parted the night before. Ellie left. None of them mentioned her going. No packing, no tears, just an evening like any other, a simple meal, a few small talk, the clatter of knives and forks on plates, and avoiding glances when the clock struck 11. Ellie got up to pour herself a glass of water, then turned toward the stairs. I'll go up to my room first, she said softly, looking at him. Good night, John said, his eyes following her as she disappeared up the stairs, his voice soft as mist. But half an hour later, as John turned off the living room light, his door opened softly. Ellie walked in, not knocking, not tiptoeing, as if it were a given, as if her body had grown accustomed to this path. For the last time, she whispered as she sat down beside him, her voice soft as the wind outside the window. John didn't answer, had just reached out and held her, his arms no longer torn as before, but no longer peaceful either. In the dark room, their bodies found each other like a farewell ritual, not hasty, not blind passion, but a gentle, heavy desire, like the low note at the end of a long song. As they lay still, sweat barely drying on their skin, Ellie rested her head on his chest. His heart beat slowly but steadily, as if the body had learned to say goodbye when words were no longer enough. I won't write, Ellie said softly, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind. Understand, John replied, his hand gently stroking her hair as he had when she was little and afraid of thunder. I won't call, she continued, her eyes closing. I know, he replied, his voice choking. And if anyone asks about us later, we'll say nothing, John said, finishing the sentence for her, his lips brushing her forehead. But you know what? Ellie opened her eyes slightly, looking at him in the darkness. That nothing is a me thing. I'll remember for the rest of my life. John didn't answer, he just held her tighter. Outside, the pine needles rustled in the night wind, as if sighing with them. The next morning, Ellie left not for rule, no goodbye hug. She left only a carefully wrapped picture placed on Jay's desk. When he opened it, it was a picture of two people sitting together, under Thepperch, hands touching, eyes looking into the distance where the pine forest never answered people's questions. In the bottom corner of the picture was a small line in familiar handwriting, love is wrong but true. John hung the picture in the wall. No one but he knew what it meant, and from that day on he lived as if it had never happened. That every afternoon when the sunlight slanted across the porch, he still found himself turning his head to look, as if still hoping for a figure to return. March of the following year. Most of the snow had melted in the mountains of Asheville. The pines were budding green and the birds were beginning to return after the long winter. The old cabin still stood there, silent, familiar as if everything had remained the same, as if time had forgotten it. In a corner of the woods, John lived quietly. He made 2 cups of tea every day, one for himself, one to cool. He told no one about Ellie. When a neighbor asked, he simply said, she's gone better for her. Then he went on with his life, mowing the lawn, mending fence, reading. But in every action, something was missing that nothing could fill. One Sunday afternoon in early spring, as John was sweeping the dry leaves behind the house, he heard a car stop in front of the gate. Not fast, not in a hurry, just a small silver clean cart door opened. Ellie got out. She hadn't changed much, the same hair, the same eyes, but there was something else, the calmness in her walk, the maturity in her gaze. She was no longer the girl who had hidden in the rain for warmth. She was a grown woman, and she was back. John stepped out, standing on the steps. You're back, he said, as if they had only been apart a week. Ellie nodded. I was passing by, thought I'd stop by. Come in, the tea is still hot. They walked in like strangers who knew each other well. No hugs. No questions, no need. All the important questions had been lived through. No more words needed to be said in the old kitchen. John poured tea. Ellie sat in her usual chair by the window. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains, casting long streaks of light on the table. How's work? John asked, pouring, trying to keep his voice even. Good. They put me in charge of a small collection, Ellie replied, turning her cup slightly. Her eyes never leaving the door. Did you see anyone? He asked again, his voice light. A few people, Ellie said, and turned, but no one. I told the whole story to John. Paused for a beat, but he said nothing, just nodded. And you? Ellie asked, her voice lower. You're still here, still drinking tea, still saving some for the person who didn't come back. John said, smiling. But he's gone now. Ellie said nothing. She just looked at him a long time. Then she put her cup down on the table. I have to go now. I have a meeting with a friend in center of town. John nodded. I see. Ellie stood up, but instead of going straight to the door, she walked around to the desk where the painting she'd left a year ago still hung. She looked at it, then she turned back to John. I don't think the painting is still here, she said softly. You can't leave it, John said, his eyes softening. It's the only thing left. To remind you that it was really nodded. She stepped closer, standing in front of him. In that moment, all distance seemed to disappear. We don't have to say anything, do we? She asked. No, John said, his eyes never leaving hers. Just remember. She nodded, then turned away. When her hand touched the doorknob, she paused for a second, a very short one, opened the door and stepped out. John didn't see her off. He just stood there watching when the car started and disappeared behind the pines. He sat down in the same chair where she had been sitting, his hand still holding the still warm cup of tea. Nothing had changed, but nothing was the same either. And in the small house under the pale sunlight at the end of the day, a painting still hung there quietly, like a secret that no one but the two of them understood. Thank you for staying until the end. Today's story may make each person have very different feelings. For you, it is a wrong relationship. For others, it may be the sympathy of two lonely souls. For some people, it may just be a lesson about boundaries that should not be crossed. What about you? What do you think about the love between John and Ellie? Is it salvation or an unforgivable mistake? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. We always read every line you share. This is a channel specializing in telling stories of adultery, secret love, wrong love, and even taboo relationship chat no one dares to talk about in real life, but they still happen, still exist, and still make people think. If you like this genre, don't forget to follow, turn on notifications, and share this story with those who need a different perspective on love, even when it's not up to the norm. And see you in the next story.